everyone, Jessica Crowley, Enterprise Agile Coach and founder of Ethically Agile. And with me today, I'd like to introduce you to Daniel Vacanti. Daniel has 25 years of experience with Agile and Lean practices, and he, back in 2007, helped to develop the Kanban method that is used all over the world today. I'm super excited, and Daniel, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Jessica. Thank you very much for being here. It's my honor to be a part of your program here.
Awesome. So the first question I had for you is having looked a little bit into your history and realizing that you had a little over 11 years of experience under your belt when you started to develop the Kanban method. So what was the inspiration and what was the learning that brought you to that point of formalizing this into a method?
Well, actually, to maybe to be even a little bit more specific, I probably only had seven years specifically with agile methodologies. Like I think like most of us, I got my start, in waterfall, ITIL type projects, which, I was that whole time I always thought there had to be a better way, which is why I was so glad in about 2000 I discovered a more lean agile approach to doing stuff. And then when I got the invite to go out to a company called Corbis out in Seattle, I joined a team, and a lot of the engineers that were there had already started playing around with a methodology that came to be known as Kanban. We weren't calling it Kanban at that time, but they were using it only for maintenance and support. And so my job was to come in and say, okay, can we take, and they were very, very successful with it. And so the question was, can we take what they'd done with maintenance and support and apply it to more, project/product?
Even though we all have this like common kind of the same roots, I'm seeing a lot more variety in the approaches, a lot of new additional frameworks and new ideas coming up. And especially in the last couple of years, it seems to be just kind of rapidly bubbling. Perhaps even that we need a little bit of a mindset shift in the way we're approaching agility.
Yeah,
What do you think
there's
about
no,
that?
yeah, there absolutely, there's no doubt. I mean, the thing is that, at the end of the day, we're all trying to, I think, solve the same problems, right? We're all trying to deliver value for our customers, usually in a complex, if not complicated environment. And so to say that there's one approach, one methodology, one framework, one whatever that has a monopoly on all the answers is, I think a bit naive. So it doesn't surprise me that, a lot of these things are, are really, really kind of, emerging. But when you take a step back, at kind of more of a principles level, it's all kind of the same thing. The more that I get involved with the Scrum community, I realize, really what Scrum's doing is almost the same as what we're trying to do in Kanban. So, at that high, like I said, that high level principles, you really don't see that much difference, even though maybe people might be calling things, differently on the ground.
Right. I remember being in that Scrum at Scale Agile transformation launch, my first like exposure to the world of Agile. And I remember really only learning things through the Scrum lens. And I do remember, especially in my role as like a project controller with a finance and a
Mhm.
program management, like traditional KPI type of mindset, I do remember having moments where even though the Scrum framework and the approach that we were using was really drawing our teams together, it was giving us a great means of iterating and delivering value to our customers, we were still missing an overall emphasis on at that portfolio on understanding our capacity, limiting our capacity at the portfolio level, and focusing on metrics that are a little more robust. And I say that nicely, but throughput, WIP, cycle time, I got all of that from my briefly reading through the Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability book. And I got it at a time of crisis, which is when I'm sure a lot of people are reading this book, is when they're in crisis and they're in this like quest to figure out how come we're still not meeting our customer delivery dates? How come we're still not providing a sustainable pace to our organization? And why is it that there's still pet projects happening when we have product owners and dedicated Scrum teams? And it's really the crux of things, right? I mean, when you start to sink hundreds of thousands of dollars into an agile transformation, and you get some parts of the value, and you read articles of all these other companies that are getting more robust return, it's like, what's missing here, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I always get in trouble for going down this path, but I'm going to go there anyway. I mean, rightly or wrongly, agile methodologies, traditionally agile methodologies, have been, I think, hyper focused on people. And don't get me wrong, people are important. You know, I mean, but the problem is you can have the best performing team in the world. You are, sorry, the best feeling team in the world. You know, everybody could love each other and everybody could be happy and things like that. But you may not be delivering, you know, great stuff for your customers. You know, your customers may not be happy. The finance people may not be happy because, you know, because we're not, you know, we're not, you know, investing properly or whatever. And so that's why I think we do need something that encompasses, you know, all of that risk. You know, not only do we have a responsibility to our team and our team members, but we have a responsibility to all of our stakeholders. You know, somebody somewhere is paying the bills, and you know, our jobs are really kind of dependent on them paying the bills. And so that you know, we have to take on the responsibility then of, for lack of a better way of saying this, spending that money wisely. You know, are we delivering what our customers want when they want it? Are we doing it as efficiently as possible? Are we doing it as predictably as possible? We need to consider all of those things in terms of our framework going forward. And so I think that's the gap that was in Agile that hopefully the more lean side of things is trying to fill.
Right. And I can see a lot of the different major frameworks trying to change. You've seen, like, if you're familiar with the scaled agile framework, you notice the shift they made, the subtle shift they made about more customer centricity, business agility emphasis. And you're seeing this, like, all of a sudden there is a gap being identified, and they are trying to figure out ways in which Scrum can fill that gap. But I have to say that I feel like my journey has led me to a point of really being kind of agnostic, um, in the fact that I've seen the good and the bad of the agile world. I've seen the sales pitchy, I know one framework, I'm going to make you fit in my box type of thing, and then I'm seeing on the other side people having companies having confusion over which tool is the right tool, which approach is the right approach, who should I trust with the agile budget I have for training and coaching. And I don't know that I can say the frameworks are really helping with that.
Yeah, so I mean, if I can jump in with a shameless plug here, then you know that one of the things that we've been trying to do with prokanban.org, which is, you know, kind of this community based,
Been on it.
yeah, yeah, you know, endeavor, whatever again, whatever you want to call it, where we've published a guide. And you know, kind of one of the key tenets for us when we published the guide was, again, come at it from that principles approach. Um, because you're right, you know, context is king, and there's, you know, there's no one framework that is going to apply to every single context, but there are general strategies that are probably not always, but probably going to work better. You know, so like in the Kanban guide, we talk about things like, generally speaking, it is better to control work in progress than to not control work in progress. Generally speaking, it is better to visualize your work than to not visualize your work, right? There's a bunch of principles that we talk about, but what we don't talk about is how to do those things. Yes, it's better to control work in progress, but we're not going to tell you how to do it. Yes, it's better to visualize your work, but we're not going to tell you what to do, because your context is going to dictate what the right thing is. And so, yeah, so you're right. Yeah, I mean, getting on the sales side of thing, and I don't mean to denigrate any other framework, but to say, yeah, you know, we absolutely have to do Scrum here, we absolutely have to do Safe here, we absolutely have to do Kanban here, whatever, um, is I think very much misguided.
Right. And I've had, you know, a couple of really good conversations with leaders like Jeff Sutherland and key people that have been on this journey for quite some time as well. And their general message is being open and adaptive and collaborative with other frameworks and other approaches, and understanding that when agile fails in places, it actually has like a ripple effect. It doesn't really matter what your approach is when we start to see case studies and degradation and poor implementation of lean agile concepts. It has a ripple effect across the entire industry. An example of that would be, did you read the article, Department of Defense Agile BS?
Yeah, I mean, I heard about it. I mean, there was there was all that whole thing on Twitter for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I never actually went and read the article, but yeah.
it's quite, I mean, if you're in the agile government sector, it was quite, it just was like, honestly, I had a little bit of a chuckle because it's like you're desperate for agility. And if you're not agile, there's a whole slew of people that will prey on a large pocket of money, like the government's budgets, and their desire to be agile. So it was, reading it was quite funny. There's a lot of trickery happening and a lot of poor implementations of agility that are being sold. And then when they get into it and the Department of Defense contractors are like, wait a minute, are we really agile? What does agile even mean? What does agility look like for a large contracting organization like mine? It was kind of like a pull back the curtain moment and holding people accountable and setting at least some type of boundary for what agile is and isn't in the government sector in a way that people that are contractors and the government civilians can read it and understand it. So I actually thought that that was kind of um, interesting and did have a ripple effect. It didn't matter what approach you took after that. You have to be very clear about the fact that your services are things that will in the end meet their need and help them develop things that the warfighter really needs, like capabilities. So that was an interesting thing. And I have to say, I did print this guide and download it and read it.
I see lots of notes there, lots of scribbling or whatever. I hope we didn't make too many mistakes.
I had lots of notes. The very first interesting thing I thought is I had expected a few things. Maybe they're cliche. I expected principles. I expected some type of Kanban manifesto. And I was actually pleasantly surprised. The very first thing that I read talked about practices. And so maybe you could drop a little hint as, so we're not choosing principles or we're choosing practices, things that are being actually physically implemented. And what was the strategy behind that?
I am not a big fan of things, of legislating things like values or legislating things like principles. To say that Kanban in particular, there's a whole bunch of myths around Kanban that says you have to start with where you are now, and you have to do evolutionary change, and you have to promote leadership or whatever. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe large scale upfront change is what you need. Maybe radical, and by the way, I would argue anytime you limit WIP is radical, revolutionary, not evolutionary change. But maybe those are the things you do. And so, again, I always want to get back to this context thing. Your context is going to demand what's right for you. And like, the Scrum values, as well. I know, all the Scrum values are in the Scrum guide. And I have to say that leaves me a little bit cold, because it's like, imagine a team, that says, they don't have, respect or courage or, openness or focus or whatever. And then like, we adopt Scrum, like, oh, okay, respect's important now. Oh, okay, we're going to do respect. I mean, that's just silly, I think. And so that's why we try to stay away from those types of things. Like I said, legislating specific, because our fundamental approach, and the reason we call it prokanban.com or prokanban.org, sorry, I don't know if I said .com before, but prokanban.org. The reason it's short for professional Kanban. And the idea is that you're coming to this with a professional mindset. There are certain table stakes that need to be met for you to even be successful. And that is this idea of, respect for people. That is this idea of being a good team member. That is this idea of wanting to pursue improvement every day, right? There are all these things that roll into professionalism that if you don't have those things, you've got bigger problems than, well, should we be doing Scrum or Kanban? You know what I mean? And so that's why we kind of stayed away from that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is that. I like that pro Kanban thing. I did find the website, and I was looking through the guide, and I actually found, so a lot of the ideas and principles are things that I read in this book. um,
Well, yeah, and for anybody who out there is familiar, there's a professional Scrum with Kanban guide out there, with PSK, professional Scrum with Kanban guide that we developed with scrum.org. That, there's a lot of stuff in that as well. And it's trying to distill it down to its essence. But sorry, I interrupted you. What were you gonna?
Well, I think the reason, okay, so in the desperate search for some solution for the problems that I had, which I think a lot of portfolio level individuals, financial individuals, program management individuals will find themselves in this same predicament, even when they implement approaches like Scrum. And I read this book, and the first two chapters really don't say, this is a Kanban book. It says this is a book about flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I found that interesting as well when I was reading the guide. The very first the very first thing that stands out in here is that this is a guide about flow, and that by optimizing flow, you're optimizing value. Just tell me a little bit about your success with that, with helping organizations, because I know that your book says that you've been doing agile training, coaching, consulting from 2007 and until now on Kanban. So
Mm-hmm.
what is the success? What can businesses expect if they focus on optimizing flow? How likely are they're going to optimize value?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm biased, but I think
I
it's
want to
fairly
hear it.
likely they will, that they will be successful. Yeah, where you and I are in complete and total agreement is that yes, this is more about flow than anything. And if I had my way, and I probably could have had my way, but um, there would be some, with prokanban.org, there would be some mention of flow, maybe in the title even. The problem is that Kanban's kind of out there, that cat's out of the bag. And, but in many ways, Kanban is a terrible, terrible, terrible marketing term, because we're not really talking about Kanban the way that people traditionally think about Kanban. We're talking about flow. We're talking about managing flow more in the Don Reinertson kind of school of thought. For those of you who don't know who Don Reinertson is, you have to go and read everything you can find about, from Don Reinertson. So that's this idea is, to get back to your original question, the expectation is that the whole reason that we exist in our professional lives usually is to deliver value for somebody. That's why we are here. And that value must be delivered, as I mentioned before. It must be delivered when our customers are, it must be what our customers want. It must be when they want it. It must be done as efficiently as possible. And by efficient, I mean, optimally allocating the economic resources that we have available to us. That's time, money, people, whatever. And it must be done as predictably as possible. And so when I look at those conditions, those kind of preconditions of things that we need in order to optimize value, principles of flow address all of those. Flow does it in a way such that it is accessible to the customer. Just simple things you wouldn't think about it this way, but simple things like the metrics that we advocate for tracking. I mean, like in Scrum, even though it's never been a part of Scrum, but in Agile in general, they want to talk about story points and velocity or whatever. And you coming from a finance background, I mean, have you ever gone into a CFO's office and tried to explain what a story point is?
No, I had to spend hours converting story points
Yeah.
into dollars and hours.
And that's what most people do. You can always see them. They always have to do some translation. They have to spend a lot of effort translating from this ridiculous thing called story points into something that's more tangible to them. And so that's why, like I said, this is exactly
I
right.
literally had classes where I'm like, it's like one team's got $20, another team has a totally different currency. It's math.
Yeah.
You gotta do
Yeah.
math.
But what is consistent across all of them, from a customer understanding perspective, is like cycle time. Customers inherently understand, well, how long does it take to get something done? They specifically understand, well, how many things should we be working on at any given time? There are concepts that they understand, and there's no translation that is required. In fact, we're actually speaking their language because we're answering the questions that they care about. So it's things like that. That's why I think just flow in general is such a good approach. And I think you see most modern management methods kind of migrating to that. If you look at the evolution of the Scrum Guide, I think you can do this. I think you can go look at somewhere. Someone has, but you'll see which each new release of the Scrum Guide, it's getting more and more like a flow document, which is wonderful. The first time I read the Scrum Guide, I'm like, wow, this is a flow document. So yeah, I'm rambling here, but I think you kind of get my point.
No, I think you've really helped to answer the question. I mean, there is a lot of value that organizations can get from focusing on flow.
Mhm.
And whether they're doing that at the portfolio level or the team level, the benefit is really the same in being able to answer questions like when will a team be done with something, and how much does the team have that they're working on in the same time. And I think the world I've been trying to live in is really at that portfolio level, with helping organizations understand that having 300 projects open when your when your actual capacity is 25 is is really shooting yourself in the foot, because it leads to the behaviors of pet projects. It leads to the behavior of overworked and overburdened people. And it's not a pull system anymore, it's a push system. And even if you're using things like an approach like Scrum, if you have a push system on top of a pull system, it's not going to work. I mean, that in the end, like it's like the engine is gunked up. It's
Yep.
the only way to describe it that I can think of. And one of my biggest frustrations was trying to get people to understand why it was worth, why it was worth taking 300 projects and closing them all except for 25. People had heart attacks, they were so upset with us narrowing our portfolio down to 25. Any tips on that? Like, I know this has to be something you encounter when you go in to help organizations get their capacity and limit themselves.
Yeah, I don't know if this answers your question directly, but the whole time you were talking, I was thinking that the crucial aspect of flow, I think, is the idea of risk management. And this again is why I think flow is such a wonderful approach, especially at the at the portfolio level, is because it almost always comes down to risk, right? There's no such thing. What people need to understand. This is where I'm going to go kind of get on my soapbox here. But what
Yes.
people need to understand when we're talking about a complex world, a complicated, whatever you want to talk about it, there is uncertainty involved at some level, right? We don't know whether this thing is valuable or not. We might think that we know, but we don't know. We don't know how long this thing is going to take. We might like to think that we know, but we really don't. And there's uncertainty inherent in everything that we do. And the second that you recognize that uncertainty is intrinsic to our lives, then what you need to realize is throw determinism out the window. There's no such thing as 100%. There's no such thing as, yes, this is going to make us $1,000,000 and it's going to be done on January 1st. That does not exist. Instead, whenever uncertainty is involved, now you have to start taking a probabilistic or statistical approach. And we need to understand, okay, well, there's an 85% chance that it'll be done by January 1st. And, maybe it'll make us $1,000,000, but it could make us zero. It could make us 2 million. It could make us negative 1 million, right? There's a whole range of possibilities, and we need to understand the risk associated with each one of those outcomes. And so the reason I'm saying that is because, hopefully maybe to answer your question, is everything that we do should, I'm going to say, yeah, everything that we do should be kind of around um, using data to inform our decisions around managing that risk. And to your point, if we only have capacity for 20 things and we got 300 things in our portfolio, that's a tremendous amount of risk that we're carrying, right? I mean, it's just a horrendous amount of risk that any sane person would not carry. And if we can quantify that somehow and say, you know what, by working on 300 things rather than 20 things, not only are you not going to get 20 things done, you're probably not going to get any of them done. And not only is it not going to cost you $100,000, it's maybe going to cost you $10 million. So if we can start quantifying things that way and changing the conversation in terms of risk, because most executives, most senior managers, most whatever, they do kind of understand risk.
Oh,
They
yeah.
want the language of certainty, they want the language of determinism, but they do kind of understand this idea of risk.
I love that idea of looking at, boy, like things like cost of delay popped in my head. Like, as you were going, I was like, wow, you could really quantify that. You could really justify that in a way that they could understand. And When I read your book, it was after I had spent 6 months creating basically a giant database of how our business cases were planned to perform. And like you said, you could plan for things to end at the end of the year. You could plan for it to generate millions of dollars in sales. But what really actually happened is, it's a series of fortunate or unfortunate events, really. And I had to say that one of the cool things that your book had talked about, which I hadn't done at that point yet, was Monte Carlo simulation, and being able to basically take the powerhouse of data that I had and start deciding, like generating, if we do this project that's similar to some of these other projects, what's the most probable outcome that we're going to have from taking on that endeavor? And I don't know why this hasn't caught on more. I just don't get it. It blows my mind, because if you can create a world of data that's your own historical playbook that said, here's what I've done and here's what's worked and what hasn't, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you start to say, should we do these future things based on historic success?
Again, I think it comes back to that probabilistic thinking thing, because humans, we're not programmed, we're not evolutionarily designed to think probabilistically, right? Our minds are not wired to think probabilistically. And so the second you start introducing some uncertainty into a forecast, people freak out, because they're like, why can't you tell me with 100%? Why can't you tell me, exactly what's going to happen? And I think that's probably why I think like a Monte Carlo simulation is almost too transparent, because we are actively acknowledging that, what we don't know. There's, the model's telling us there's about a 70% chance that, this will happen. There's a 30% chance that this will happen, and people don't like that. It makes them very, very, very uncomfortable. But I think, obviously, again, I'm biased, but I think the companies who get this stuff are the ones that are going to survive, and the companies that don't won't. I
I
really
do
do believe
agree
it.
with that. I also think that there's an incredible emphasis on the business case in organizations. Like from from
Yeah,
large to small mom and pops, people use business cases to decide,
yeah.
basically, am I going to get the net present value, the return on investment, the payback period that I think I'm going to get? And it's in the midst of total uncertainty. And what I found is that the majority of business case assumptions are erroneous, and
Hmm.
especially they don't have historic backing. Let's just chat about that for a second. Now, I mean, for one example, you're starting out a 10-year development project. You hope to have 20 years of sales after you finish that 10-year development project. So you're going to sink a lot of cost in developing that product. And upfront, day one, like, don't even have a good idea about what type of design you have. You're trying to get people to give you an estimate on the cost of a production cell for a
Hmm.
product that has not even been conceptualized. It just blows my mind. And you baseline it. So you baseline this initial guess, and then from then on, you systematically review how much you've deviated from an absolute guess. And there's so much money, and there's, especially in like the government sector, for one, that's one example of a threshold of traditional program management that has, not really changed the way they measure things like success, in the form of like things like earned value. So it just kind of blows my mind from a portfolio standpoint that we use these business cases and these best guesses that more than likely aren't based on history, and we choose to make investments for the entire longevity of our company and the lifeblood of our company in this way, when there are more statistically sound ways to make decisions. It's just, and they're huge.
Yeah, yeah, you've been talking a lot about the government. One of the very first jobs that I ever had was working for Sprint, the telecommunications company, which I don't think it exists anymore. I think they just got merged with T-Mobile anyway. It was the same thing. They did business case driven portfolio management, and I always like to say that business cases, they're fiction at best and outright lies at worst. I mean, because every business case I saw had a return on investment that hockey sticked, right? I mean, every single one. And at Sprint specifically, back at the time, it was, I think, 2000 or whatever. they had a rule that unless your business case could prove $1 million return on investment, it wouldn't get accepted. Well, guess what happened? Right?
We all
And
miraculously had amazing
yeah,
return plans.
yeah, and it was absolutely silly, because I know for a fact that pretty much every project I worked on in Sprint lost money. So
Yeah.
that's what really started getting me down this path of, wow, there really has to be a better way. And by the way, I think the only industry, or whatever you want to call it, that's worse than telcos is the government, right? I mean, in my mind, those are really just the absolute two worst. But yeah, there's got to be a better way, and I think there is. And I think, not to say that what we're doing right now is the end all be all. I'm sure that we will, and I hope that we will improve from here. But you're right, we have tools available to us today that are just so much more advanced than what we're using right now. Why wouldn't we?
Is anybody out there, any of these companies, are they using like historical baselines? Are they creating data that they can base their decisions on? And it's not trending. What I found a lot of was collecting big data and using big data to inform leaders. And then I also found that leaders are over informed in data. So it was like, why wouldn't you use something like Kanban at the project or portfolio level? Why wouldn't you measure that? And why wouldn't you use that to inform your business cases?
There are a lot of industries out there that are, that are using Monte Carlo, oil and gas exploration, insurance companies, finance companies, and things like that. But what fascinates me is those companies don't use probabilistic forecasting for their agile projects. They use it for everything else, every other core part of their business. But when you go into an insurance companies who really, above anybody else, should understand risk. It should be their lifeblood. And you suggest something like a Monte Carlo simulation for running their agile projects, they freak. They just freak out. And I'll never understand it, because I think insurance and finance have been the worst offenders, in my humble opinion, in terms of trying to introduce these concepts, to get them better at agile delivery.
The world of finance, even in the way that we were making our forecasts and our assumptions about how we would perform in the next quarter or that year, it seemed more like we were being reactive than being proactive and looking down the road and saying, yes, these are sound investment ideas for our company, and this is how we think our portfolio is going to perform. It just didn't have the robustness of having actual data and making informed, data-driven decisions. Okay, well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. Any last minute things that you maybe want to share with those of us that have watched?
And if you're interested in Kanban, come check us out at prokanban.org. We're trying to emphasize it being a safe, inclusive, diverse community where people can just come and learn about these things. Whether you're brand new to Kanban, and you're just starting your journey, or whether you've been doing Kanban for a while and want to sharpen your skills, whatever. I would just highly encourage you to come check us out.
That's awesome. All right. Well, we'll be checking out prokanban.org, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thanks, Jessica, for the opportunity for being here. It was great talking to you.
It was great talking to you too.